Hello all, welcome. We're starting episode 5 of this Alive series. My name is Giselle Curi. I am part of the team at Ashoka that leads the Spiritual Changemakers initiative, and it is my pleasure to host this conversation with Karen Che and Jerry White, who are going to be telling us a little bit more about their inner values, innovations, ideas, everything that they're bringing regarding justice, healing, interrupting violence, and seeing the light in every person, amongst many other things that we will be unpacking together. So we really welcome you to this space. And to start warming up, I want to invite you to share in the chat where you're calling in from, and maybe a word or two about what does justice feel like. Think about that. Like, how do you know, or how do you recognize and acknowledge the feeling of justice? And this might mean many different things. So we really encourage you to put this in the chat. And while you all think about it, I also want to ask both of our guests here today to help us arrive and help us get started by sharing a few words. So maybe, Karen, do you want to go first?
Yes, well, I just am very happy to be here. As I was saying earlier to Jerry, I last saw Jerry almost 20 years ago. And Jerry, you were an incredible inspiration to me then. And I'm looking forward to being in conversation with you today. And thank you so much, Giselle, for bringing us together. And I'm very, very excited about this conversation because we don't always get to talk about really spirituality and faith in relationship to justice. And it's so integral that opening the conversation feels also like an opening into a new chapter.
Thank you. I'm really blessed to be in this space with you. Jerry, a few words to get us started?
Yes, I say ditto to the welcoming of this conversation, and what a blessing to see Karen after so many years and her being on the front line of some of the most important and toughest issues of the world. Just want to honor that and honor Giselle, also your great work in pulling us together. For me, when I'm thinking about justice today, it's like a lot of the words that we work in, peace and justice, they're words that I've avoided for a long time. Like, that's been my whole life's calling, I see. But I thought that actually if I said justice or peace, it would jinx the work, because justice and peace were so, it's like humility. It's so up there and out there, or love. These are like universal, spiritual, the deepest of values. But if I just come back from the heavens of justice, peace, and love, and come down to like our stratosphere, I think of justice as like, in the best, it's this precursor for peace. Because if you think of the scales that are balancing, so balance is a very important aspect, I think, of both peace and justice. Are the scales balancing? You know, we see those in our imagery of justice, but also are the elements balancing? So I want to put out there that it's not just two scales or a binary of either or spectrum. It's really what's happening with fire, air, earth, and water. And maybe that's the more spiritual space of how north, south, east, west, how these elements find each other in balance. And then once in balance, the enabling conditions are there for an ecosystem of peace. So for me, justice is a precursor in our constant attempt to balance the elements so that we can experience peace.
I love it. And it's a matter of balance, and it's also a matter of being in connection with one another. So thank you so much to you both for being here and for helping us get started. I will make the reminder that the chat is open. We're exploring the feeling of justice, the experience of justice, if you want to contribute to that conversation. And also, I want to encourage you to send your questions in the Q&A box below in your screen. That will make it easier for us to see what questions you're bringing with you today. And I want to share just a little bit about what this conversation series is about. Alive is powered by Ashoka to feature leaders and change makers who anchor principles and values connected to their spirituality and faith to the work they do in building a better world. And this is part of the Spiritual Changemakers initiative, which is a dynamic interfaith network that is choosing to explore the nuances between the being and the doing, but also while leading initiatives for social and spiritual change. So we're currently actually also in the process of welcoming a new cohort to the Spiritual Changemakers community, and we highly encourage you to apply. And you have until this Thursday to submit your application. So I'll just make that quick public service announcement, and then my friend Moy is going to put the link in the chat. So if you want to explore that, all the information you'll be able to find there. And coming back to a little bit of the format of this conversation, we'll have about 45 minutes of deep dialogue and conversation with both Jerry and Karen. And then we're going to transition to a different Zoom space. So right now we're unable to see you, but we do want to hear from you and we do want to see your faces. So we highly encourage you to stick around, stay with us towards the end, and join us for that breakout group space. We're going to put the link in the chat. You can save it now. We're going to put it back later so that you know where to jump and where to find us next. And we'll signal when it is time. But also, we have the tradition, and we always like to start these episodes with a basic reminder of being alive, which is breathing. So I want to welcome you to this space and invite you to take a few seconds to arrive just by sensing your breathing. So if you can close your eyes, if you can settle in, feel your feet against the ground, and just feel how the air flows in and out of your body as a reminder of that aliveness. Because it changes the rhythm of how we started. And it also helps a little bit with the nerves, at least for me. I don't know if Karen and Jerry also feel that and feel their heart pumping. But breathing is also always a great reminder. So welcome, and we're going to keep going. I want to give you a little bit of context about how we came to this conversation and how we were craving this conversation. And the truth is, we sense the need for this timely conversation because with everything that's happening around the world, we often find ourselves surrounded with information that is talking about justice, but at the same time is being profoundly polarizing. So I can share, at least from my experience, I'm someone who is active on social media. And I realized that I have gained so much language in recent years from following inspiring community organizers, activists, leaders who are really good at pointing to societal pain points and framing the demands that we need to address, and kind of like how we need to address the systems of oppression that have created so much damage globally. So I'm really grateful that they have helped me see differently. And at the same time, I constantly find myself craving for content and voices that are proposing ideas and solutions that go beyond the narratives of us and them, which is a little bit of what you were saying at the beginning, Jerry. And I crave for voices that actually uplift our shared humanity and that see the ultimate goal of embodying justice in that shared humanity. So we invited Jerry and Karen today because their lives and their work are really good examples of bridging those inner values and outer work in ways that center agency and dignity for all. So we like that both of them are coming from different journeys, different angles. And I think that we have so much to learn from you both. So it's truly an honor to share this space. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a short bio for both of you. And I'm going to allow you to just complement and add to the things that I'm going to be reading. So I would like to start with you, Jerry. You are a spiritual activist, a social entrepreneur, and an Ashoka Fellow who currently leads United Religions Initiative, also known as URI, which is the largest grassroots interfaith network promoting peace, justice, and healing. You founded Survivor Corps, envisioning a victim-free world, and you're known for leading high-impact campaigns, 3 of which led to international treaties. Something else about you is that when you were 20, you lost your right leg to a landmine explosion in Israel, which brought you to later share the 1997 Nobel Peace Prize awarded to the international campaign to ban landmines. So tell us, what did I miss? what else would you like to share about who you are and what you've done?
I laugh because I always think of that as like, is that so last century? Or it's like someone else is reading about someone's life that I think is more like Forrest Gump. Like I happen to have the privilege of showing up in these big headline moments um, where you shouldn't really know my name if you're behind the scenes. And some of the best leadership is always ensemble casting. So I think that's it, a philosophy of not worshiping heroes, but knowing that each and every one of us has a role to play in co-midwifing, whether it's a treaty or community work. And what did you miss? I think that's like the human side. You know, I have a wife and partner of 35 years, Kelly White, who is amazing person. Everyone who knows her sees her as the secret weapon and the person who should be on this call. And also 4 adult kids who are delights and trying to, like all of us, find our place and thrive in the world. So thank you for that kind introduction. So
Thank you. And now you, Karen, you are the founder of International Bridges to Justice, or IBJ, an organization that is creating the conditions for a new normal in justice through a systems change approach. You're an international human rights lawyer, an ordained minister, and a Ashoka Fellow who has made groundbreaking contributions to judicial reform around the world to enable access to justice and the end of torture, while ensuring also the protection of a variety of human rights. You have been a public defender, have served as the United Nations judicial mentor, and have received various awards for your social entrepreneurship and leadership. And what else can you tell us about you and who you are?
Thank you. I feel like this is like a game show. And what else? I think that's perfect. Just to maybe if I could add that International Bridges to Justice is really focused. I'm a former public defender, as you said, and we're really, every day in countries throughout the world, people are arbitrarily detained and tortured. And oftentimes people think it's political. People are just tortured because it's for political reasons, but actually 95% are tortured because they don't have a lawyer, and it's the cheapest form of investigation. So really, we specifically, International Bridges to Justice focuses specifically on giving people a lawyer early on in police stations and courtrooms. And really, so much of it really started when I was not in law school, but in divinity school. So I think that's also why I'm very happy to be here together in this conversation.
Thank you. And maybe as the first question I want to pose to the table is if you can share with us a before and after moment that today shapes who you are. Maybe you were talking about divinity school, Karen. I don't know if it's any other point in your journey, but whoever wants to go first, please share that before and after moment that today shapes who you are.
Aaron, you please go.
I was going to say, I think Jerry should go first.
No, you. I went first last time. Oh, all right. I will say one of the before and after moments, because I think of those as, life changers, and they happen throughout our lives. So there are many at my age. But one of them that I think affected this work very much was when I was early on shifting from like arms control work and very cerebral national security thinking in Washington, D.C. And we started on the landmine campaign, and I started to meet landmine survivors all around the world. One of my early trips was to Cambodia. And when I was on that trip thinking, oh, we'll help set up these networks for landmine survivors to find like care and rehabilitation and social and economic reintegration, all big words, all great intentions. And I was in Phnom Penh, and it was a hot, humid day. And I needed to take off my prosthetic limb to like wipe off the sweat and reattach it and make sure that I could walk for another few miles. And I saw this young girl who looked no more than like 10 or 12 hobbling across the street on one crutch, a wooden crutch. And she was really like navigating the traffic to get to me. And she came and she was just staring at me, putting on my little fancy black, graphite leg. And she didn't have a prosthesis. She was missing her leg above the knee. And she was speaking in Khmer. And luckily, I had an interpreter there. And I said, what is she saying? I had seen her begging across the street. And there were so many landmine survivors and amputees almost on every street corner back in the day because of the killing fields and so many landmines and so much unexploded ordnance that was continued after the war to keep ripping body parts off people. So here was one in my midst, and I said, what is she trying to say to me? She seemed very excited. And he said, she just said, you are one of us. And at that moment, I thought, well, no, I'm not. So I distanced, like, well, I have this fancy leg. I'm an American. I'm here to help people like you who don't have the opportunities or that I have. And it was almost like a Grinch moment, like Cindy Lou Who crossed the street on one leg and came up. And I started to thought, I said, wait a minute, how dare I distance myself from this person with showing enormous integrity and dignity, not being a victim, not playing the card, not begging, just identifying with me. And so my heart grew 4 sizes that day because of her, that I looked back and said, oh, we are all equal in dignity and rights and being part of the earth. And so I don't know her name. This was, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, but I remember her face and feeling that she changed me. And then my work all changed and fell into that category of equality and dignity. No one is better than or less than anyone else. And the best support is enabling and empathetic and grounded. And so, yeah, she changed my life. It wasn't the landmine explosion. I think it was that young Cambodian girl.
Mm-hmm. How powerful to hear you're one of us. Like, how large can the us word be, right? What about you, Karen? A before and after moment.
Before and after. And thank you, Jerry. That was really beautiful. You are one of us. I think for me, too, it was also a moment in Cambodia. So something we share in terms of it being a transformative physical space for both of us. And I was back in 1994 working to train lawyers and put lawyers into courtrooms and police stations. And I remember that it was really challenging, training police officers and feeling threatened and everything that was happening in the prisons. And I remember once on Saturdays and Sundays, I used to volunteer with her name was Sister Rose, and it was an orphanage in Cambodia. So you might know this one too, Missionaries of Charity. And I remember speaking to Sister Rose, and she and I were completely different, like our lives were completely different, but somehow she always gave me perfect advice, although we came from different places altogether. And I was like, I don't know what to do. And I remember that she looked at me and she said, and I was thinking, should I train better? Should I be using this code, or what should I be doing from a very sort of analytic perspective? And she said, what you have to do is you have to look for the Christ or the Buddha. And she was like, it doesn't matter if it's Christ or Buddha, because we're all one, as you're saying. She said, you have to look for that in each person that you work with, whether it's the police officer, whether it's a prison guard, whether it's whoever it is, sometimes even people that you think are your adversary, because she really believed in the power of transformative love. And I took her advice to heart and began to see transformations, almost like magic in many places. And I think that if I had not had that experience with her and then seeing the power of that kind of transformative love, that I might not have started International Bridges to Justice, because I might not have believed that it was so possible, in these times.
Mm-hmm. And Karen, if you can maybe tell us a little bit more about in this line of transformative love, how has that showed up when you're weaving networks? Because I think both of you, part of what you're really good at is that not only saying this is what needs to be done, but like inspiring other people to say, I share this, I share this belief that something larger, something, maybe I share this love and I want to do something about it. So how do you see that as a glue maybe for networks and for the work that you have built with IBJ?
Do you say as a rule or as a
Glue?
as a glue? It's interesting because International Bridges to Justice is not a religious organization. It has a lot of spirituality and faith base from everyone's own spirituality. And there's many different traditions because we're working in different countries throughout the world. But one thing that we always do as we're building the community is not necessarily to talk about any specific faith, but to talk about values. And, you know, we started by asking people and lawyers to share, if it's a lawyer community, to share something that they appreciate about themselves in their life and the values that they bring forward. And this is, I think, something that I've seen back in our work in Cambodia when I train police officers, by asking them, what are your values? What is it that inspires you to bring forth who you are into this work? That there's something that's almost like an invisible energy or magic or glue that allows people to bring their best selves forward.
Mm-hmm. And I hear you talking about bringing forward values, and I think it also connects to mindsets, or how we understand how we have maybe shortcuts in our minds that can help us move towards action or choosing life. And Jerry, I think that you have also developed some sort of framework that is about how can I think about things differently? How can I believe in a different kind of future so that we can move towards not seeing ourselves as victims, maybe seeing maybe ourselves towards the survivor side. But what does this make you think about?
I love that Karen brought it up, and there's these two V words, like values, and then there's like victims and violence in a world we inhabit. And so I do think Karen's put her finger on this core centerpiece. If the people we're working with, whether my former students at University of Virginia while teaching, or in any community that's in pain, anchoring in the values, but even like a transcendent piece of that, I sometimes think of them as energies, Karen, because there's the ones where every mission statement or every UN building and every project might rifle off the values we're all supposed to have memorized and pledged to. But going deeper and saying, who are you, Giselle? Like, what do you stand for? What energies are most resonant in you? And for me, I don't go beyond allowing many people, I just go for 3. Like, if you don't know your 3 core frequencies or energies that you stand in these values, that can have different names, like your favorite word for it. So for example, when I am doing my best work, it's that the values are centering or energizing through me. However that works, it sounds a little mystical. And I have come and circled around to say, like, my name is Jerry. That's just my name. And I'm manifesting in this like white American male body at 6'3", and I say, but who am I? Being. And I say that my name is Jerry, and I stand in and stand for light, liberation, and wholeness. And if those are not revving in me, or 2 of my cylinders are down, I hope 1 is always alight. So over time, we don't always stand in full bloom in our core values, and we fall from that grace that I think has been given to me and to each of us. So there's something about the energy of it that then fuels. Then you may be exhausted by the work, but you're exhilarated because your gifts, your core energetic values are in play and in motion and in service. So that seems to be the joy or the flow we're after. And without what Karen mentioned, centering on the V word for values, whatever your version of that is, it's hard to do.
Mm-hmm. And I think that what you're also getting to is this idea that the values, it's not only about the introspection, or it's not only about the reflection within, but in how do you actually are putting that in practice, in action. So I would love to, if you can share with us more, how is it that you have achieved this systems change approach by like connecting these values or this part of who you are into what you do, which is 2 separate things, but you have managed to say, here's a system, here's what I believe, and these are my talents, this is what I can contribute. So what can you share about this, either one of you?
Well, I want to share about system change and maybe connect it back, because I had a couple of thoughts, Jerry, as you were speaking. There was a point where you used the word exhausted, right? So sometimes we're also exhausted. And I think that, in the work that we do, it's often extremely challenging for the defenders, right? They're in unsafe situations, they're defending, they're going into prisons, and sometimes it's really not easy. And yet at the same time, there's something that's embedded. So Giselle, you were asking about, like, what do you do in terms of system change that allows us to come back to who we are. And I was thinking about an experience that I had a few years ago in Syria, actually on the Syrian border, where the Syrian lawyers had come in for a training. And we often start by lighting a candle. For me, like, light means a lot. So we would also often light a candle and then start some of our trainings and talk about values and whatnot. And I remember there was a certain point in the training where actually it became very contentious, because I also think that sometimes we should sing, or we should have a song, or we should have something that brings us joy together. And I had asked one of the lawyers, he said he played a small instrument. He goes, "Oh, I can bring it, tomorrow for our closing ceremony, and it'll be great." And another one of the lawyers became very, very upset. And he said, how can we do this? How can you say that we're going to sing? Or, our children, our wives, our families are being bombed right now. It's so dangerous. Like, we came out for this training, but how can we do this? And he was very upset, and it became very contentious, like with all the lawyers there, because it was just somehow so much of the underlying tension became explicit, and it came out in this moment for it. So there was so much there, and it was, I think, a rough moment. And then I felt like they were all kind of mad at me, because I was the one who suggested the singing and the, celebration. But I remember that we broke, and then we came back together. And when we came back together, one of them picked up a candle and lit the candle and said, "Candle, candle." And everyone said, "Candle, candle." And it was sort of a remembrance of us all together, of a value that we had named before, which is that, even in times of tension and darkness, and where we felt like a lack of hope, that we could bring this light in with a candle. And that was maybe something that was symbolic by bringing in a candle, but also something that maybe was already part of what was embedded into the system change. When we talked about the legal system, when we talked about what do we appreciate about the system, when we talked about how do we move forward, it was also about values, and something that all of us were able to just kind of find a touch point to come back to.
I love that, Karen. And I mean, little did you all know that when I enter into sacred conversation like this with people I so respect, that I always start by lighting a candle. So for you, Karen, and your work in dark places, and for us trying to find our way. And so it's sort of a ritual that I'm glad you bring. And part of it came from, I think, for me, when I thought, it sounds strange, it's so last century again, but when I was working with, a candle in the wind, as Elton John called her, Princess Diana, in that last year of her life, she used to say that she's not doing anything that special. She's just caring enough to show up in places where people are in pain, and to bring her light. I don't think if that was necessarily her word, but she clearly had so much light into sort of dark places, to like spotlight, highlight, or shed light onto something of suffering and injustice. So when we say about working values, there's number one, like, I'm in the room as Jerry, whether I work at Starbucks or at the State Department or on international campaigns. So Jerry needs to bring his light and his values into the room as best I can to do my best work. Number two, in casting or self-casting someone like the Princess of Wales in the campaigned to ban landmines, she was going to bring herself. So deep compassion, healing, and grit, survival into her work, a sense of survivorship and resilience. And so that's different. So then you have 2 candles and then 3 candles and then 4 that the light connects. So no one candle can dispel the light. It can actually remind you of light. And so this idea of bringing in the light of survivors and activists and people of heart all around the world means that this piece is not a solo sport. It's not just a sport for celebrities or ambassadors. It's, of course, a sport for all of us to bring our light to the table of what's happening in front of us, small and big. Like I say, whether I'm a barista or a diplomat, it doesn't matter. It's how is it you bring your light. So it's a combination of your candle meets other people's candles, meets like some super bright, famous candles sometimes. But most of the time, I say it's not like a Messiah is going to show up in our day and age, or there's not like a Mandela who's going to reappear. It's really more, I call them mini Dellas, like the candles, whose names you'll never know, but who are on the front lines, who keep sparking. And we bless them and we want to protect them. And Karen knows this all too well, like protecting the defenders of human rights who are on the front line in danger, and for them to hear that they have us as witnesses and not just bystanders, to protect and prevent torture. Like I have, all respect for that, of how Karen is showing her light in the world and lighting other candles.
Mm-hmm. And I think in the theme of candles, I also want to go back to something you shared at the beginning, Jerry, about the balance between fire and water and earth and air, because I think candles also have fire, right? Like it's what lights them up. But to me, like that fire sometimes is full of anger or pain, or it's full of resentment, or there is something deep in the pursuit of justice, of saying there was a wrongdoing and I'm deeply hurt from what's happening. Like I am of Palestinian descent, for example. I have shared this in another Alive conversations, and sometimes I'm like, what does justice even mean? And how do I balance my fire so that it shows up as light, rather than showing up as a desire for vengeance or a desire for things that are not really feeling like justice in my body, but then maybe sometimes if I lose my way a little bit, they might pretend to be justice. So I think that both of you work with healing, and you work with deep amounts of pain. And I would love kind of your guidance in how this fire can be constructive, how this light of the candle adds up to the lights of others, but we also balance that fire so that it's not destructive. So what do you hear and what do you say?
Karen, maybe I'll punt it to you. I would just say that anger is okay. I mean, on one hand, the world is on fire and leaders are burning out, and we're seeing scorched earth. So clearly, and fire, and then so we add air to it. Let's say we smarty pants analyze at a think tank the conflicts around us. And so and media, internet, air. So too much thinking and then too much media. If fire is just getting more air and oxygen, it will spread fast. So we're like, I don't think we need more words here. How do we ground it in earth and water? Clearly, we're begging for water to balance the raging flames. And I have some thoughts, but I wonder about, Karen, what do you think when you see that fire? And also people want to, whether spiritual friends sometimes can't deal with the pain of anger or rage or outrage, like angry activists, like we're scary. And you're like, no, like it's a paint that in a color called dark red, blood red, that is on the canvas in front of us, and we must acknowledge and understand it. So anger well channeled, like you're saying, Giselle, your own fire contained and surrounded by wax and some protection to not burn others, is a calling and requires some balancing. So I'm wondering what Karen thinks about that. What when you see the anger, like if you aren't outraged by watching someone torture young people and rape, like, I think there's something wrong with you. And to neuter anger and fire, as opposed to balancing it in different ways, seems to me a mistake. And the world is very conflict averse while we're raging with conflict.
I like fire. So
Yeah.
I think it's both. And it's like the yin and it's the yang, right? And having it together. And there's no up without a down, and there's no night without a day. It's together. So I also think that there's a way in which, Giselle, you were saying, hey, how do you express it? How do you let it be? You don't ignore it. It's not just, it's about love. And I do believe that we choose love, and it's stronger than fear, and it's stronger than darkness. And at the same time, all of those things are there. So I think for me, what's been very powerful is watching people who have been in such situations, who have, like example, I was speaking about the Syrian lawyers before, and one of the Syrian lawyers who was describing all that she had been through, including torture and just terrible, terrible things, and yet still talked about anger and rage and expressing it, and also about herself choosing love and forgiveness and hope, because she needed it as a means to move forward. And it was really inspiring for me, because as she was speaking with all the other lawyers, I realized that, many people think that hope is like a soft thing, or hope is just like a pansy thing. It's like, a drug for the masses or whatnot. And yet hope is the vehicle. Hope and imagination allow people to keep moving forward. And she was saying, we've got to move forward towards our dreams. We have to create a system where everyone has the protection of a lawyer. We have to work on it, because we can't just give ourselves up. We can't just say, fear wins or hatred wins or whatnot. We have to choose some things. And that for me is very much about spirituality and faith, and also about justice, so that we remember. It's sort of like when the Syrian lawyers brought back the candle and said, candle, candle, come back to some of their values. And I think for us as a world community too, there are times after the war where we came up with the Geneva Conventions and we say, we're not going to torture. We're not going to do certain things. We won't, do certain things to children. There are things and there are standards that we have. And for all of us, it's critical that we always self-examine and say, well, what are our values that we believe in? And, how are these things aligned? And there are certain things that are inalienable, certain things that we believe. So it is really like in times of calmness that we also create things and create our own belief systems that we can remember and hold on to. And, I was speaking with one of my colleagues today who just went on I think it's Camino de Santiago, the pilgrimage, walking, and was very inspiring to me, because he said, the important thing is you just keep walking, and you keep walking on the path. And I think that's true for all of us, that even in thinking about this call, I'm thinking, well, I failed in this way, and I thought I would do this, but I didn't, and then I didn't do this, and I'm not as cool as I thought I was, and then I'm angry about this and that. And I think the point is that we just keep walking, that we're on a path, and that we have our values, and we'll sometimes fall from them, sometimes get back on, but we continue it. And that's also what life is about. Life is a journey, and life is about us coming back to the center of who we are and starting over, and keep on going.
And what do you think, Karen, if I can butt in here, on the beauty of the path and the journey that is very compelling and I think important? And then you said the yin and yang, that this idea that like outcomes are Western constructs, or that you don't, as Mandela said, set your face toward the sun, for some optimism and hope, as you describe. So I run into these tensions internationally, where yin wants to oppose the yang, or the journeyman and women want to oppose the directional leadership, that there are outcomes of rights, justice, and dignity that actually do matter, that you're walking toward. So I'm so glad that your path has you walking toward that light. Do you think that there's something too Western about outcomes?
Outcomes are important, right? We move towards things. Outcomes are important. I'll be in trouble maybe with Ashoka if I say outcomes aren't important. So I think these things are all important. And sometimes I think that we get so caught up in outcomes that we aren't able to see other things that really matter. And there are certain things that are not, you can't measure in a tangible way. And yet what I've seen in my 20 years with International Bridges to Justice, and even before founding International Bridges to Justice, is that those are the tangible intangibles that make so many things possible. And I've seen that over and over and over again when, there hasn't been funding, and yet the defenders are, say, we don't care about the budget, we're going to keep on. Where does that come from? Right? There's something else that allows us to believe. If we didn't have, any hope, if we didn't have any imagination, if we didn't have any faith of possibility, even when it is seemingly impossible, I'm sure that the defenders would not create and be able to do what they do every day, because that work is super, super tough. But there's something else that allows them to keep going. And I think that's true for all of us. And we need to nurture that. And that's something different than some of the outcomes that we're looking at in terms of KPIs and whatnot.
I always think of that's lovely to say, like, it's not always apt. Or,
Is it the Einstein quote?
when I think of like URI, United Religions Initiative, that I now am helping co-running with so many people around the world. The first mission was to promote, enduring daily interfaith cooperation. So circle number one, or purpose number one. So we've seeded over 1,200 interfaith cooperation circles in over 110 countries. So that's an outcome, rather remarkable, to have this web of interfaith movement. So that's lovely. And then they can do whatever they want. I mean, you may be planting trees, it might be women and girls' rights, it might be saving the river, it could be anything. So the autonomy of communities doing what they need to do in their backyard without having to do logical frameworks and outcomes. So there's something about letting just natural community work be natural and organic and autonomous. So yeah. But the mission of the organization, number two, is also to end religiously motivated violence. And so we look at a world on fire, we see that religion-related violence is the fastest growing type of violence in the world, and it begets more violence, and we're seeing this quite on fire. So the question is, well, it was necessary to have individual and sort of community transformation and set up these. It wasn't sufficient to actually end religiously motivated violence or prevent and stop it, early. So we've had to take a look at that requires a little more science of violence, science of spirituality, outcomes, what actually works in terms of interventions to put the boundaries, because no one can flourish if you're surrounded by violence and threat. So you might have community connection, perfect, but without protection, not so much. So that's, I know that one of the reasons why, Karen, I so admire your work is in that protection field, and URI needs to grow and mature in that area. We have over 350 cooperation circles working on peace building and conflict transformation, but sometimes I feel that they're missing tools. Those are big words, conflict transformation. How does it show up in very practical and community-based ways? And lastly, to your earlier point of music and singing and candles, our third element is creating cultures of peace, justice, and healing for the earth, embracing Mother Earth, and for all living beings. So this is the sort of the natural and ecological regeneration, but it's done. What I love about the three purpose areas is that two of them are rather positive, like community connection and celebration and honoring of the earth. but we deal with the shadow as well. 1/3 of that is you must have the protection or there can be no flourishing. So those elements in the recipe for flourishing, you are always asking, no one's doing anything wrong, and some may be more outcome focused than others. But it's important for collectively for us to find the balance and to say, what's missing in this conversation? What's missing in the healing? What's missing in the protection of vulnerable or religious minorities that are facing genocide and other things? So it's back to balancing, and I love like celebration. Where is the dance, the joy, the dreaming, the hope, the light? Because that's without that, there's no wherewithal, or it's harder to go on the path, let's say, if there is no light.
And I guess my question to this is, what are the things that work? Like you're saying, we need the tangibles, we need also the intangibles, but we need to be looking at maybe evidence-based, or like, what are the things that you have found in the work that you do that actually serve the purpose of interrupting violence and moving us towards that place of imagination and hope and action too? And I'll also leave you thinking with this while I say that we have a few minutes left here before we transition into breakout groups. So if you have questions you want to put in the chat, it's a good moment to do so. And then we'll find ourselves in that other space. But the question is, what are the things that work? What have you found that serves this purpose?
And I think, it's interesting. We probably have sort of like the flip, because ours is not a, religious or spiritual organization per se. Ours is very purpose-driven, action-oriented. People are tortured every day. They need protection. So when I think of justice, I'm thinking safety, protection, not being invisible, and providing the protection of a lawyer. And so those are all tangibles, right? Those are all the types of things that you can send to a funder, number of people trained, number of people who receive a lawyer, communities that are built, access into prisons, torture victims who are not tortured, XYZ. And I think the thing that is also really interesting is the flip side, which is a lot of what you also do, Jerry, which is absolutely critical. Like, what about the community building aspects of it? What about the sort of intangibles that make it possible to survive beyond projects, right? Because there's always project funding. There's something else that builds the movement. And I think that's very, very much connected to our conversation here today about being alive. And being alive is not one specific thing. It's, what brings out that energy? What allows you to keep going when you shouldn't keep going, or you shouldn't logically believe that you can? What is it that makes us alive? And so for us, it's interesting too, to think about, are there other things that we can bring in and quantify? And these are some of the things that you're sharing with us, Jerry, which is phenomenal.
Love your use of the word us, we, us, we. So this idea of that, even with Ashoka making like special people who are Ashoka fellows, this isn't about heropreneurship or actually individual work, although leadership does matter. It's co-leadership, co-creation, and cooperation that I think is so important, that no one does it alone. And this idea of finding that collective effort. So for me, what's worked is not just looking at everything. Isn't all work beautiful and all gardens are equal? You're like, well, yeah, they're equal in dignity and rights. And NGOs do marvelous work around the world. What I find in our dilemma is when NGO-itis, or as you point out, sort of projectitis, or isolation, like wonderful, like little flickers of candles, which we don't diss, but that's necessary but not sufficient for the collective call to action. Without a common call to action, I haven't experienced building community. And so even in the international campaign to ban landmines, you needed an international call that was like, ban anti-personnel mines, clean up the minefields, and help the victims. Pretty clear. And then everyone said it will never happen, and it happened, and you grew it through 1,200 organizations around the world, including the survivor voices, and then some superstars, bright lights like Princess Diana, among other things. So it was a collective effort. It was where civil society, when it gets together, is a superpower, but maybe that's something to talk about too. There's a shrinking of civil society and safe spaces to actually do the work around the world. That's really alarming to us. In the late 1990s, when the International Campaign was formed, as well as URI, the organization I lead now, those were the heydays of civil society shining light in groups with common calls to action. And today feels a little darker to me. And I'm wondering what Karen or you, Giselle, think about that.
Well, I think it's in our area, it started dark because we go into the darkest prisons, and that's where most people are invisible and our defenders are bringing light. And well, what gives me hope, Jerry, is also that you brought your candle here today. And I was looking around thinking, I need a candle. So I think there's a lot to be discouraged about, and there's a lot to be encouraged about.
And something, sorry for interrupting, Karen, but something I have heard you say is whatever you focus on will grow. And I think that that's such a smart philosophy for everything, because it's a matter of attention, but it's also, there's real power in saying, I'm gonna be putting my effort, my energy, my attention in this, because it has the potential to grow, whether it's good or bad. Like if we're immersed in just looking at our own trauma, then that's what grows, right? But if we're saying, I want to be focusing on how to get out of this, or how to, Jerry, I think I heard you say, for me, justice, and this was before in another conversation, but you were talking about how justice is also this hope that whatever happened to you doesn't happen to someone else. Like it's that care and community connection of saying, I went through stuff, and I don't want this to be the lived experience of anyone else, because it's not fair, it's not worth it, it's not nice. So whatever you focus on will grow. I think it's what you are making me think about.
I think raising the voices of, landmine survivors back in the day gave attention to that, and therefore it grew. The collective survivor voice and allies to make the issue human. It wasn't just about a technology, anti-personnel mines. It was about people, farmers, children. Again, we forget 80% of the victims of war, landmines, are civilians. It's not the soldiers. So this militarism that takes the headlines and whatever and creates lots of suffering in the world, it's people who are suffering the most, like innocent civilians and families. So keep that in mind, the vast majority. The other thing is that I think we have an advantage today that the science of violence, the science of flourishing, the science of spirituality, even of how the brain is wired for these things, is charting another. So like the question is, how are we wired? What actually works? And there's been much more research since the 1990s and where we are today. So how-to strategy for me is the art, creative, and science can be measured, some things, of creating change. The art and science of creating. It's a creative work. And so for positive change in the face of uncertainty, disaster, conflict, all the darkness that we may see. So strategy itself is a co-creating act that brings hope, but also has focus. And in my case, when we're looking at violence, I'm thinking that the Cure Violence Global by Gary Slutkin, another Ashoka fellow, brought in an innovation that said, oh, violence behaves like a contagious epidemic. It spreads. It's a behavior. Violence is not inevitable. It can be detected, contained, and interrupted and stopped with certain tools. And the science of violence is showing itself how to do that as well, that the protection is needed. So how we interrupt it is super important. So we take these great practice, like innovations of Ashoka, and apply it through, the network of United Religions Initiative, when people haven't even heard the health approach to violence. That is not about bad people and making all our leaders and the perpetrators all evil. It's about bad behavior that can change. And that's scientific hope. And to make it a strategy would be to spread that understanding or that finding in practice and measure and watch us, reduce religion-related violence and all types of violence, because all types are contagious. so that we can say, wow, what does it mean if you step back and shut your eyes and say, what would a violence-free, victim-free world look, taste, and feel like? Like you have to, back to Karen's word, which I love, imagination. You have to believe in a sense, even we ourselves are non-religious, non-partisan, non-political organization, but we have to have imagination and belief of this better world. And from that dreaming that it is possible, you then work backwards, like from the clouds and the sun onto the earth. And that's why, so back to Karen, like so respect her earth, the groundedness and pragmatic nature of her day-to-day work is so critical. She's a dominant earth factor along with her fire. We need everyone.
Jerry, I'm receiving your blessings. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I love you.
No, it's really fantastic. And I also, when you said if we close our eyes and think about imagine what a violence-free world looks like. And going back to Giselle, who reminded me of what I said, which is whatever you focus on will grow. And sometimes I forget that and I focus on other things. And that's the beauty of possibility, Jerry, which you just mentioned too. Believing in the possible and really creating or co-creating that and knowing that we can do it, but we have to focus on it. We have to believe it. And in the same way that bad things are contagious, I don't remember what you said it was, fear or something is contagious, courage is contagious and hope is contagious and love is contagious. And that's why it's great to be on this call. Thank you.
And I think that that's a really good bridge to one of the questions that I see in the Q&A box that is asking, what happens when my beliefs are different from other people's beliefs? Like, is the difference in belief systems what creates the problem itself? Is that the root, or does it not matter that the belief system might be a little bit different? And how do you deal with that difference in beliefs?
Well, I think that for me, that's still really a growing edge, because oftentimes you really feel division when someone believes something different from yourself. And it's hard for us to remember what Jerry said earlier about us being one, all of us being one and being different parts of the one. So I think it is about finding the commonality too sometimes and not allowing ourselves. I go into that. I get like this and differences and everything else. And yet maybe sometimes going back to what we all believe. I was just at the World Economic Forum in Davos and wanted to bring people together for international bridges justice, for early access to a lawyer. And in years past, we have always brought together different religious leaders from different traditions. And this year, people said, it might be a little bit more difficult this year. There's a lot of contentious feelings about everything. And yet, what we did is we looked at the fact that we're taking care of people who are accused of crimes, and it's about the inherent worth and dignity of every person, right? It's like every person. We're saying every person is important, including people who are imprisoned or may have done something. We still have to respect them and not torture them and give them their due process rights. And so what we did is we asked every tradition to come up with what they say about the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And it was really a blessing that we were able to come together from all different traditions in a potentially contentious time. And we were focusing on like, well, what do we have in common? Well, we also don't agree on so many different things. And sometimes maybe that's part of focusing on what we can focus on and allowing some aspect of our oneness to grow. Though I think it can be challenging. Thank you for the question, and thank you for both of your insights.
And I fully agree. It's not only that there is a difference in beliefs, there's always something we share. Like that common humanity can help us be creative about how we find those avenues for connection so that from there it can grow, right? I think that's what I'm also keeping from what you're saying. And Jerry, I don't know if you have something else to add, we also have, we're about to transition into breakout groups. So I encourage everyone who still has questions to bring them with you so that we can explore them together with you in that other space. But I'll let you chime in, Jerry, if you have something else to add.
No, I love building on the conversation. Just say there's the dignity of difference and allowing that, like, I'm not you, but you are I. So that the idea that both at the same time, being able to hold the space of all the biodiversity, the polycultures, when you see political ideologies or you see even religious nature trying to make everyone the same, that monoculture is natural, or fundamentalist like messianism is like, it's not. I live in the woods here. You take a walk in the woods and you see fallen trees and you see the ecosystem and you see that it takes all types of difference. So are we asking that sapling to be different from the oak tree, or asking the hummingbird to be different from the woodpecker, or the eagles that I see in the forest? No, so the dignity of difference and respect for that is fundamental. And even when it comes to some aspects of, like, I've gone on safari or seen the ecosystem and been in awe of, is the lion telling the giraffe not to be a giraffe? What about the warthog? Is it screaming for the hippo to stop being a hippo? So there's an acceptance of difference and a peace in that, of the glorious, effervescent, constant creativity of what's being reinvented and co-creation that is the natural order of things that I have deep respect for. So I think learning from nature helps us in our respect and acceptance of difference. And lastly, I would say, let's say you're a conservative, fundamentalist, evangelical, and I don't interpret the scriptures as a Christian the way you do, and you think I'm going to hell. I'm like, that's your belief. Like, I don't care. Like, why should, I'm not worried about my soul and in my faith, and I may be different than you. That's blessed. There should be 1,000 different interpretations of 1,000 scriptures. That's normal. These are but the only thing we're talking about here on the violence front is, like, you may believe I'm going to hell, but you don't have the right to push me there. There's a line. And what we're talking about violence is the line. What do we protect and defend? But otherwise, God bless, difference away.
I love that. Embracing difference. And I think that that also allows for innovation. It allows for things to change when we hear things that are different. If we just are putting ourselves in bubbles and echo chambers, we're not getting anywhere, right? So I'll use this as our transition so that we can meet our audience in our breakout group space. You'll find the link so that we can transition to that other space and see you and see your faces in the chat. So just click on that space. Our friend mentor is going to be welcoming us up in that other meeting room, and we'll join you in a second. So thank you, Jerry, Karen, for this beautiful conversation.